What if the story of American history, the one we were taught in schools, filled with tales of colonists, founding fathers, and presidents, was only half the story? What if hidden just beneath the surface, there were entire nations that dared to exist in defiance of empire, people who declared themselves free, while the world around them insisted they remain in chains? These were not whispers or rumors. These were thriving, self-liberated communities. They existed not for a moment, but for decades and even centuries. They built homes, raised families, planted crops, waged wars, signed treaties, and created their own order. They were called the Maroons. But here is the mystery. Why don't we speak of them? Why don't our textbooks celebrate their leaders, their victories, their very survival? Perhaps because their story reveals something uncomfortable, that freedom in the Americas was not gifted from above, not handed down by generals or governments, but fought for, stolen back, and defended by the enslaved themselves. The Maroons show us that history is not just the story of rulers, but also of the ruled who refused to submit. And so, tonight, we will travel into their world. We will walk into the misty mountains of Jamaica, where warriors waited in ambush. We will descend into the swamps of North America, where families carved out hidden lives. We will journey into the rainforests of Brazil, where entire nations of the self-liberated stood as rivals to European colonies. And we will ask, as we uncover their secrets, what does it mean that these stories are missing from the history we are told? The system of slavery was designed to appear unbreakable. Chains, patrols, laws, and punishments all reinforced the illusion that escape was impossible. And yet, from the very beginning, people resisted. On ships crossing the Atlantic, some chose to leap into the ocean rather than live a life in bondage, their final act a refusal to be owned. Others revolted mid-voyage, taking control of ships, even if only for a few desperate hours. And once in the Americas, escape became a constant rhythm, an act repeated again and again, across every colony, across every century. But escape was not enough. To survive beyond the walls of a plantation, one needed more than courage. One needed to find or create a world where life was possible. To colonists, the wilderness was a terror. Swamps bred disease. Mountains blocked travel. Forests hid predators. The land itself was seen as hostile, filled with danger. But to those who had known hardship before, to those who had endured hunger, storms, and warfare in Africa, this same wilderness became a shield. It was a place where the slave patrols dared not follow. It was a landscape that could protect those bold enough to vanish into it. At first, the escapes were solitary, a young man slipping away at night, barefoot, running silently through the woods, a mother clutching her child, hiding in ditches by day and moving by moonlight. A handful of men gathering in the shadows of a cane field, whispering plans. These first acts of defiance often ended in hunger, recapture, or death. Yet enough succeeded to plant the seed of something larger. Over time, those who fled began to find one another. Camps became villages. Villages became communities. Food was grown. Tools were crafted, and stories were shared around fires. What was once a desperate bid for survival grew into something more, a new kind of society. The colonizers had no word for them, so they borrowed one from Spanish. Cimarrones, wild, untamed, those who would not be mastered. To the enslaved, the name carried pride. They were untamed. They had broken free. And slowly, a new world took shape. The Maroon world, hidden inside the cracks of empire, a living challenge to the very foundation of slavery. The Caribbean was the beating heart of plantation slavery. Sugar, tobacco, and later coffee made fortunes for European empires, but they also demanded relentless labor. For the enslaved, the Caribbean was a furnace of suffering. Yet it was here too that resistance burned brightest. In Jamaica, the British quickly discovered they had inherited more than a colony when they seized the island from Spain in 1655. They had inherited a rebellion. Africans had already escaped into the island's interior, joining with indigenous survivors to form free communities in the Blue Mountains. The forests were thick, the trails treacherous, and the Maroons knew every inch of them. From these hidden strongholds, they launched raids, freeing captives, burning fields, and melting back into the mist. For decades, the British tried to stamp them out. They sent soldiers up the narrow trails, only to have them ambushed. They used cannons, bloodhounds, and bribes, but nothing worked. The Maroons were masters of guerrilla warfare, striking swiftly and vanishing. Stories of their tactics spread across the island, filling the enslaved with hope and the colonizers with dread. Out of this struggle emerged legendary leaders, men and women who guided their people through war. Among them was Cudjoe, a brilliant strategist who led the Leeward Maroons in western Jamaica. Facing overwhelming odds, he fought the British to a standstill. Eventually, the empire was forced into a humiliating compromise. In the 1730s, treaties were signed. The Maroons were granted land, autonomy, and recognition as free people. In return, they agreed to stop raiding plantations and to return new escapees, a condition that caused anguish but also revealed just how powerful the Maroons had become. For the enslaved, the Maroons were proof that freedom was not a dream but a reality, already alive in the mountains above. For the British, they were a reminder that their grip was fragile, that even the mightiest empire could be forced to bend. If the Caribbean showed the resilience of small, hidden communities, South America revealed the scale of what was possible. In the dense jungles of Suriname and French Guiana, Africans who escaped Dutch plantations forged societies so enduring that their descendants still live there today, speaking unique languages and practicing cultures born of both Africa and the Americas. But it was in Brazil that Maroon history reached its grandest expression. High in the mountains of Pernambuco, a settlement began to grow in the early 1600s. At first, it was only scattered hideouts, families huddling together for survival. But over the decades, it expanded, village by village, farm by farm, until it became something extraordinary: Palmares. By the mid-1600s, Palmares was more than a refuge. It was a kingdom. Some say it stretched for miles, housing tens of thousands of people. It had leaders, councils, soldiers, farmers, healers, artisans. It had fields of cassava and maize, herds of livestock, defenses built into the hillsides. It was a world within a world, a black nation in the heart of colonial Brazil, and it endured for nearly a century. Time after time, Portuguese armies marched against it, numbering in the thousands, but Palmares fought them off. Its warriors knew the land, struck with speed, and defended their homes with ferocity. Among its leaders, one name has echoed through centuries: Zumbi. Born in Palmares but captured as a child, Zumbi was raised by Portuguese priests before escaping back to his people as a teenager. He became a warrior, then a leader, and eventually the face of resistance. Under his command, Palmares held out longer than anyone thought possible. Even after his death in 1695, his legacy burned too bright to be extinguished. Today, Zumbi is honored as a hero in Brazil, a symbol of black resistance and resilience. His story reminds us that Palmares was not a fleeting rebellion, but a society, a vision of freedom sustained across generations. It proved that the enslaved were not only capable of surviving, they were capable of building nations strong enough to defy empires. In North America, the landscapes of resistance looked different, but were no less powerful. Imagine the Great Dismal Swamp, stretching across the border of Virginia and North Carolina, a vast, tangled wetland buzzing with insects, filled with snakes and treacherous with quicksand. Colonists saw it as a wasteland, impassable and cursed. But to those fleeing bondage, it was a sanctuary. Deep inside, on patches of dry ground hidden by reeds and water, Maroon families built lives. Archaeology has uncovered traces of cabins, tools, and gardens. People planted corn, beans, and squash, hunted deer and wildfowl, and fished its dark waters. For generations they endured, children growing up never knowing the crack of a whip or the overseer's lash. The swamp swallowed them from the gaze of empire. Further south in Florida, a different kind of Maroon story unfolded. Escaped Africans joined forces with the Seminole people, forging bonds of kinship, marriage, and alliance. Together they created villages, tended herds, and fought wars against American expansion. The U.S. called them the Black Seminoles, but they were more than an alliance. They were a people. When the government tried to remove the Seminoles in the 1800s, the wars that followed became some of the most costly and humiliating conflicts in U.S. history. Black Seminoles fought with unmatched determination, their guerrilla tactics echoing those of their cousins in Jamaica and Brazil. Even after forced relocation to Oklahoma, some broke away again, crossing into Mexico, where they built new communities and continued to live free. North America's Maroons may not have built kingdoms as large as Palmares, but their defiance was just as enduring. Whether in swamps, forests, or along the Florida frontier, they proved that freedom was not a single place or moment. It was wherever people chose to claim it. What did it feel like to live inside a Maroon settlement? To wake in the morning and know you were not someone's property, that the land beneath your feet was yours, that the people beside you were free? For those who escaped slavery, life inside the Maroon world was a miracle, but it was also fragile, demanding constant vigilance. Food was life, and agriculture was the center of survival. Africans brought knowledge of crops like yams, rice, and plantains, and blended it with new plants found in the Americas. Gardens were carved into hillsides, fields hidden deep in the forest. Hunting, fishing, and gathering supplemented the diet. Everything was used, everything conserved. Leadership was varied. Sometimes a council of elders, sometimes a single charismatic warrior, sometimes a spiritual guide who held the community together. Women often played crucial roles, not only as farmers and caregivers, but as keepers of knowledge and healers, their wisdom carried from Africa, blended with indigenous practices. Children grew up surrounded by stories, tales of Africa, of ancestors who had crossed the ocean, of escapes and battles and victories. These stories were not entertainment alone. They were lessons, teaching the young that freedom was both their inheritance and their duty to protect. Spiritually, Maroon communities were alive with song, dance, and ritual. Drums echoed through the night, carrying rhythms older than slavery itself. Songs told of sorrow and joy, loss and triumph. Ceremonies honored ancestors, sought guidance, and gave thanks. In some places, African religions were preserved almost intact. In others, they merged with indigenous beliefs and Christianity to form new spiritual traditions, unique to the Maroon world. Life was not without hardship. Illness could sweep through a village. Raids from colonists could destroy years of work in a single day. Betrayal was always a danger. Informants sometimes revealed hidden camps in exchange for rewards. Yet despite the risks, Maroon communities endured, proving that freedom was not only a dream, but a daily reality, sustained by courage, labor, and faith. And in their endurance, they passed something priceless to their descendants, a living legacy that still shapes identity and memory today. The Maroons remind us of something we are rarely told, that the history of slavery is not just a history of chains, but also a history of breaking them. The story we are taught often casts enslaved people as passive, waiting for abolitionists, generals, or presidents to deliver them. But the Maroons show us the truth, that freedom was seized, not granted, that it was lived, defended, and rebuilt again and again, even in the harshest conditions. Their very existence terrified empires. They proved that slavery was never secure, that every plantation, every colony was vulnerable to the possibility of flight and rebellion. For colonizers, Maroon communities were a nightmare. For the enslaved, they were a beacon, proof that another life was possible. And for us today, they are a reminder. They remind us that history is not only written by the victors, but also by those who refused to be defeated. They remind us that resistance is as old as oppression, and that even in the darkest of times, people have the power to carve out freedom where none is offered. They remind us that our heroes are not always the ones in marble statues, but also the ones whose names were whispered in forests, sung in songs, and remembered in hidden villages. The Maroons are part of the true story of the Americas, a story of resilience, creativity, and courage. And maybe the reason we do not hear their stories often is because they challenge the narrative we have been given. They show us that liberty was not a gift, but a struggle, one waged not just in halls of power, but in swamps, jungles, and mountains. What did you think about today's video? Comment your thoughts and suggestions for my next video below.